Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whisky podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, my business partner. Oh, we laugh. The dear Jason Johnston Yellen. Hey, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm intrigued this week because you haven't launched with the Jason 3 names, and yet I have been in online settings, in some different interviews in some different places, and we'll circle back to one of those in the news segment today. But I'm seeing comments where people are welcoming Jason 3 names in these online interviews.
Yeah, I just wonder, right? It's like going to a restaurant. And you go in there knowing you want something, but then you're presented with a menu. And now they're just taking off the menu. And what's on the menu happens to be Jason 3 names. You know, Dramgolf is no longer on the menu. So how could one choose Dramgolf?
Someone did actually put Dramgolf in the comments of another online interview that I did.
So they're ordering off menu, I see. Okay.
It's just hard to say Dramgolf is dead. Long live Dramgolf.
Oh, are you going to come back like the White Wizard?
It's true. Like, could you imagine if this is the grey? Like, what this looks like if I come back white? Dramgolf the White?
And they'll call you by that name and you'll say, oh, I did go by that name one time, didn't I? Oh, what fun.
To have fun.
Speaking of fun, we've got some really fun guests today, and we did a really fun thing for today's episode, something that you and I normally avoid, stay away from, try not to include ourselves in because we'll be embarrassed.
Other synonyms for avoid.
But, you know,
distance, absolve ourselves of the responsibility.
Oh, I like that, absolve, yeah. Yeah, so for our listeners, we have Steve Hawley of Westland Distillery along with Matt Hofmann as our guest today. And they're doing this thing called the Judgement of Westland, where they take 4 individual single malts around to different shows or private events and things like that. And they have people try the 4 whiskeys. And they're whiskeys from 4 different countries, one of them being the U.S. And the idea is not can you guess where the whiskeys are from, but do you agree that they're all in the same playing field, right? They're all... Yes.
Even though Jason and Joshua spend time trying to figure out where they are from.
Yeah, right?
Sorry again, Steve. Sorry again.
But the idea is, can you agree at the very least that all of these whiskeys are in the same playing field? That they're all quality, regardless of their origin, be it the U.S., Scotland, Australia, or what was the other one? India. That's right, India.
Yeah, and I think the timing of this, and you and I were discussing this before we had our time online with Steve and Matt, was we just did our extra on American single malt whiskey, hopefully very soon, earning a designation. And that came on the heels of prior episodes where we spoke to American single malt producers. They talked about their hope for a designation.
Yeah, yep.
And now here we are jumping into this Judgement of Westland, looking at global single malts. And the question here is, where does American single malt whiskey line up with other nations' single malt whiskey? I think it's a great question to be asking.
I think it's a great question to be asking, and I'm excited to hand, the listeners off to that. But I want to reel us in a little bit because there's that component of the tasting where it is blind, and you and I, and we're not alone here, right? The vast majority of people, whiskey drinkers, be they newcomers or people who have been at it for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, most people are not great at blind tasting. And I wanted to pick that apart a little bit because I found that incredibly intriguing, right? If you go to someone's house and they break out a bottle, and let's say it's a Kilchoman, and they pour that, and you drink it, and you nose it, and you're picking apart tasting notes. You're talking about this, that, and the other thing. And the whole time, I know when I do this, I'm thinking, oh, that's a great Kilchoman, or oh, I wish this could have been a better Kilchoman if maybe they finished it, or something like this. But the mind is always within, this is a great Kilchoman. I cannot say with any confidence that if that was poured for me blindly, that I would be having the same time. The same experience, I should say. And I don't know if I would be able to recognize it as a Kilchoman, or if it were any whiskey, right? I don't know if I could recognize it as such. And so I wanted to see if we can maybe spend 5-10 minutes max on this idea. And I want to ask you, I realize we haven't talked about this prior to start recording, but I wonder why you think that is. What's the mental block there?
I think part of it is nervousness, right? Someone hands you a glass and says, "What's that?" You go, "Well, okay, oh gosh." Allow me this painful corollary. At the height of Tiger Woods' success, there was a bet that was always offered. Are you going to pick Tiger Woods to win this golf tournament, or are you going to pick the field?
What do you mean the field? What does that mean? Just for those
every other player.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Right,
Gotcha, yeah.
Right. Essentially, do you think Tiger Woods will win this tournament or not? Now, the field could be 60 other players, 100 other players, but there's only one Tiger Woods, and people invariably would bet on Tiger Woods, right? Because he swayed the odds so far in his favor that if you picked the field and Tiger won it, well, of course he did, because he was amazing, right? And there's a little bit for me when someone gives you a dram and says, "What is it?" Well, there's a whole lot of things it's not.
Yeah.
And there's only one thing that it is.
Okay.
And to isolate that exact one thing in the face of all those other things that it's not, that can be a bit overwhelming.
So that was good. That was actually excellent. I thought it was. I thought, here's a tenuous AF link, but you nailed it. But okay, so let's look at the other side of it, right?
So
okay,
you got to trust me, right? You got to trust me. See, if I'm putting sports in front of you, I'm somewhat confident I can pull it off. Because again, right, the chances of that going horribly wrong are vast. But I felt confident putting sports in front of you, and I knew that you would know who Tiger Woods was.
And I know him from his golf, not just from his abuse cases, right? It's fantastic. I know him for sports reasons as well. So my question to you then is, can you use a similar culinary? Corollary? Can you use a similar corollary for those anomalies in the world, right? Like the Ben Weldies, and we mentioned him when talking with Steve. The Ben Weldies of the world, where you put a whiskey in front of this guy blind, and we've done this, and I would say 8 times out of 10, if not a bit more, he's guessing what they are.
Do you remember the old TV show, and there may be a reboot now that I don't know about, but there was an old TV show called Name That Tune.
Yeah, sure.
And 2 competitors would go up against the other, and there would be a clue, and then the one would say to the other, "I'll name that tune in 4." meaning 4 notes. And I always loved the contestants who would say, I'll name that tune in 1, because you couldn't be beaten, right?
Yeah,
Nobody could go
yeah.
better than you on I'll name that tune in 1. And Ben Weldy, as an example of the type of person who, when they hear a singular note in a whiskey,
Yeah.
say, that's the note that I find belongs to distillery X.
Yeah.
That's the note. That's the tidying up. And that's where I have a problem with blind tasting, is it's all messy to me, right? It's a little bit peaty, but it's a little bit smoky, but it's a little bit fruity, but it's a little bit nutty, right? Like, why is it all of these things at the same time? Like, and it's chaos. And I think for someone like a Ben Weldy, bing, there, I got it, right? I know what that connects to. And I think that's where sometimes when we play the role of Johnny Big Boss, right? When someone gives you an Ardbeg and you go, oh yes, I always get this white chocolate fattiness on Ardbeg, and I'm getting it here, right? Oh, this is unmistakably Ardbeg to my mind,
Yeah.
right? Or it's a Craigellachie and there's a sulphury note or a meaty note, or sometimes that strawberry note that we discussed with Stephanie McLeod. When you already have the answer, it's easy to be Johnny Big Boss and connect it to a host of things that you have observed over time experiencing whiskey. But when presented blind, I'm getting both the meaty and the strawberry and the white chocolate and the chipotle and the coal dust. They're all bombarding me all the time. It's just like turning the white noise machine up to 11.
Yeah, it's in a way, it's back to that menu comparison I said before with your names, where, here we are. I'm a vegetarian of 33 years. You're a vegetarian of 20 some odd years. And there was a time where you would go to a restaurant and you would look at the menu and there would be one item and you say, I want that. And now you go in and the world's your... Well, maybe not oyster, because that wouldn't be vegetarian, but the world's your something. The world's your broccoli.
The world's your tempeh.
Right? And so now you're presented with so many things, you can't decide. You don't know which way to go. So maybe that's it. Maybe
100%. Yep,
do you
100%.
think that perhaps people going into blind tasting something are potentially being too analytical, and Ben Weldy is able to maybe narrow down his approach, where he would say, Springbank does this one thing. I will look for that. I can't find it. Highland Park does this one thing. I will look. You know what I mean? Like,
I think his is more, I'm getting this one thing. Now, which distillery has that one thing? Like, as opposed to going in and saying, is this a Springbank? Nope. Is this a Highland Park? Nope. Is this a Lafroig? Nope. But like, kind of almost like a computer, just saying like, no, cross that out, cross that out, cross that out. I think his is much more, what do I know about this whiskey? Well, I know this one thing right here. Now, who does that attach to? And then in attaching it, okay, what else do I know about that distillery?
Yeah.
And is that in this whiskey? So
it's a series.
I only surmise. It's a wonderful party trick.
So it's a series of if-when queries.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah.
Did I say if-when? I meant if-then.
I know what you meant.
Right.
I've been with you long enough. Do you get what I'm saying, though, about that everything is there all the time? Because I know we both don't like blind tasting, mostly because it just shows up how garbage we are. But is my issue with it your issue with it? Are you also getting everything all the time, or are you just kind of like, oh, I really like that fruity quality, but that could belong to a dozen or 24 or 36 different distilleries? Like, where's your issue with blind tasting lie?
Yeah, no, I think that is it. That while distilleries across the board make unique distillates because of oak, because of time in oak, or what have you, I would say that there's certain key notes that can be tied to a multitude of distilleries. And I would imagine, too, that blind tasting is likely even a bit harder with a bourbon or a rye, right? Because you've got such an impact with the wood. That's another story. We're not even going to go there. But I think, if you get a smoky whiskey, if you get a peated whiskey, I think you can start to narrow things down a little bit, right? Is it coastal? Is it briny? Is it iodine-y? Yes or no? If it's yes, then we start whittling down a little bit. If it's no, well, then we're looking at Highland peat or something like that, and we whittle it down that way. If it's not peated, I hate to say it, Balvenie isn't the only distillery to have a honey note in their whiskey. There are plenty other distilleries that do.
Cragganmore immediately
right?
comes to mind. Immediately.
Exactly. And then you have the distilleries like Tamdhu and Glenfarclas and Macallan and Glenallachie and all of these that predominantly use sherry. And if you're tasting it blind, that could present a problem, almost a similar problem to a new charred oak cask, right? Because you've got these two casks that are driving so much flavor, I should say. So, yeah, I think the waters just get a bit muddied, and you're presented with many possibilities, and then the nervousness kicks back in. You're like, geez, I don't want to get this wrong. So I'm going to pick a route, right? It becomes a choose-your-own adventure at that point, and you hope you get to the end of the book, but chances are you chose the wrong adventure.
So I want to pause our conversation that we're having right here. Go to the audio with Matt and Steve, and then pick up this thread, because there's some things that we say and do and chart in the tasting that I want to return to with the listener knowing what was said.
Perfect. We've been called to duty. And it's not that D-O-O-D-I-E, it's D-U-T-Y. By the good people from Westland Distillery. We have both Steve Hawley, Hawley, and Matt Hofmann. And basically we've been invited to make a judgment of Westland. Right? Is this what it's called? The Judgement of Westland?
That's exactly what it's called, Judgement of Westland, yeah.
I'm excited. So you sent Jason and I each a pack of 4 different whiskeys, just labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a tasting mat in it. That's all, and that's it. So 4 samples, a tasting mat, and time with you. And now I feel as if I don't know what to do. I feel as if we're at your mercy with these samples.
What more do you need than those 3 things? It's a perfect evening at home, isn't it?
Whiskey, mats, and mercy. There you go.
Well, first of all, Joshua and Jason. Joshua. It's lovely to be together again, of course, and as always. And thank you for playing along with us. The Judgement of Westland. It's a program that we kicked off at the Whiskey Show in London about a week and a half ago now. And we'll be running similar demonstrations throughout the rest of the year for the next 3 months.
Okay.
People all over the world will be partaking in the Judgement of Westland. Now, what is the Judgement of Westland? Besides a damn good time. Well, as Matt and I and others at the Westland team have experienced for the better part of 10 years, as we've all discussed, this year marks 10 years for Westland as a distillery, which is an exciting thing and a big milestone for us. But even to this day, we're hard-pressed to go somewhere where we don't hear one of 2 things. One is, why are you making single malt whiskey? You're Americans, you should make bourbon. As funny as that is to you folks, there are many who legitimately ask us that question. And the quick answer is, well, corn doesn't really grow all that well here in the Pacific Northwest, but it is one of the best barley growing regions in the world. Mm-hmm. So that's the easy answer. The second thing that we hear almost every time we leave the doors is you can't or shouldn't be making single malt whiskey because you're not Scottish. That one, feel free to guffaw at. That one is certainly laughable.
Yeah, that's honest to goodness. I'd say that's upsetting.
Yeah, it is upsetting. Thus, we thought maybe we should do something about that to demonstrate to the world that the idea that Scotland owns single malt is antiquated. When we talk to these folks, when we hear these questions or these statements, we often think of the Judgement of Paris. Are you boys familiar with that? 1976,
Yes.
Stephen Spurrier, not the football coach, but the wine merchant from London, he brought over a number of, at the time, unknown California wines to Paris, and he blind tasted them against the vaunted Bordeaux's of France. And lo and behold, the California wines ran the table, much to the chagrin of French people to this day. But it was a demonstration that while California wines are different, they are equally valid, right? And that New World approach to wine was something that should be considered regardless of how long it had been in production.
Sure.
And at Westland, we very much see ourselves the same way. We've purposefully distanced ourselves from the idea of craft from the beginning. We are a single malt whiskey distillery. We are in Seattle. And our ambitions have always been to have a voice on the global stage of single malt. And while we aren't trying to replicate Scotch whiskey in Seattle, we do feel that no matter where you're from, if you're making good whiskey, that should be considered equally. I think the Japanese were really the first to prove that great single malt could be made outside of Scotland. That was decades and decades ago. And today, as we all know, there are great single malts being made all over the world. And guess what? America included now, which I know you've been talking about quite a bit on the podcast lately.
And I was just about to ask you both that question. Could you speak to for a moment to what we just announced on a recent Extra, that American single malt whiskey is due to have its own designation? What does that mean for Westland, and what does it mean for the work you've been doing for the last decade?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's going to be massive. I mean, how often does something like this actually happen in a category? And the answer is not very often. In some categories, the answer is never. And we've played this leading role in it. I mean, kind of by default, the fact that we are one of the leading single malt producers, but we also identified, really early that this was something that we needed to have for the long run, for the category's health, for the benefit of consumers, not just in the U.S., but around the world. So the fact that after more than 5 years of work, it's crazy, we're coming up on 6 years worth of work on this, to be so close with the TTB about to make a ruling that another public comment period, I mean, it'll be a historic thing, So that's going to be major for us, for everybody at American Single Malt, frankly.
Yeah, it was one of those things that we said in the Extras. Joshua and I were discussing it and describing it, and we weren't really conveying the excitement or how important and significant it was. And it's so funny to have just watched you answer that. Your face lit up. Your cheeks started beaming, right? Like your excitement about that designation is palpable. And I think it does speak to the important work that you've done for the last decade, and many other American single malt producers around you have worked diligently. And we also made the comment on the podcast about 5 years, 6 years of doing this and working towards that designation. Like, absolutely remarkable. So mazel. It's exciting news.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, we talk all the time about what a privilege it is to be at the origins of an entirely new category in spirits. Most people in their careers, if you want to look at this as a job, which is also sometimes laughable, but not many people get the opportunity to be a part of something like this. So it is palpably exciting, as Jason said. Our cheeks are a flutter.
Yeah, and here we are as whiskey lovers, watching it from the sidelines, and here you are, the players on the field, the coaches, helping to direct it all, along with, 7 or 8 other founding members and close to 150 distilleries helping to move this along in a 6-year process to come to fruition. It's really, really a job well done, and it's exciting to be witnessing it.
Oh, we appreciate that, and we appreciate the support you guys are giving us too. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, fantastic.
So back to the Judgment of Westland.
Yes, indeed.
So what you have in front of you is 4 different single malts from 4 different countries around the world. This set of drams was selected, curated by Dave Broom, a good friend of yours, and Sam Simmons. So independently selected. They selected these whiskeys because they thought that they were great drams, but also B, that they were comparable, right? They were comparable in proof. They're all around the same price point. They are all kind of flagship expressions of their distilleries. And in their minds, they all represent the country of origin quite admirably. There are no tricks here, so there's no limited editions here. There's no cask strength stuff. There's no 30-year-old whiskey or anything like that.
I was going to ask that.
There's no Inferno.
There's no Inferno, unfortunately, for you.
Ollie Chilton's glad to hear that.
Yeah.
We're simply asking you to do what we think people don't do often enough, which is blind taste these whiskeys. So nose through each one, taste through each one, and we're asking you to give them a score of 1 star through 5 stars. On our website, thejudgementofwestland.com, Sam and Dave have opined greatly on the scoring system that they developed here, but I break it down this way. 1 star should be for a whiskey that has a fault. There's something wrong with this whiskey. 2 stars would be, it's okay, but I wouldn't buy a bottle. 3 stars, I really like that. I would buy a bottle. 4 stars is, I really, really like that. I wish Joshua would buy me 2 bottles. And 5 stars is, wow, this is exceptional. It's speaking to me. It's telling me a story. It's got great complexity, balance, character, right? So that's the way I kind of break down the 5 stars. It's very important that you guys understand you're not trying to pick a winner here. If you want to give each of the whiskeys 5 stars, we'd be thrilled. I know Dave and Sam would be thrilled as well. Like we said, we think these are each great drams. If you want to give them all 1 stars, I think we'd be a little disappointed, but that's your prerogative. Jason, if that's the guy you want to be today, that's your choice.
I don't think I'm ever that guy.
Was this a mistake, Steve? Should you have done this? These guys?
I always wonder if it's a mistake when I get on the phone with these guys, but pretty soon my fears are allayed, and I know I'm amongst friends. Joshua, if you would for me, before you start peppering me with questions, there's a QR code at the bottom of your tasting mat. Please scan that. That will bring up a page that allows you to score those. If you do so, your scores will be automatically entered into our system that is updated every day at thejudgementofwestland.com, so people can follow along with the ebbing and flowing of scores from around the world. As I mentioned, we kicked this off at the Whiskey Show in London a week or so ago, but we'll be running through the end of the year, and there'll be blind tastings like this with groups all over the world.
It brought me to a My Little Pony fan site. Is that correct?
Yeah, you've got it. Perfect.
Yeah, that's the right one.
Good.
Good.
Go ahead, Jason.
No, go for it.
So the question that I had for you, I assume I know the answer to this, seeing as this is an audio podcast, is we can say whatever we want to say. Like if all of a sudden we say, "Oh my gosh, this smells like the Yamazaki 1984," and or whatever. Is there anything that you want us to potentially avoid saying?
No, not at all, because you're going into this blind. You don't know what's in front of you.
I don't.
If you want to guess what the whiskeys are,
Yeah.
feel free. I'm neither going to confirm nor deny.
Okay.
If you want to guess the countries, feel free. I'm neither going to confirm nor deny. If you want to start asking me questions about specifics of each of those whiskeys, I will politely refuse, because I know you're just ploying to take a better guess. I think it's really interesting. At Westland, every Wednesday we do a Whiskey Wednesday where our entire team blind tastes whiskeys. We often taste our own whiskeys. Sometimes we taste other folks' whiskeys. Sometimes we don't even taste whiskey at all. And it's remarkable how challenging it is.
Yep.
You guys have had almost every whiskey in the world, I would imagine. Sometimes when we're doing our own tastings, we can't even pick out our own whiskeys. Sometimes we can't even tell if it's made from malt or rye, for instance. So I think people underestimate how difficult and challenging blind tasting is and trying to guess. But what I'd ask you to do before starting to guess is really clear your mind, is to go into this without any preconceptions, without the pressure to guess what they are, and just evaluate the whiskeys on their own merits. If you want to then give them a score, then we can move on to, your wild guesses, and you can embarrass yourself in front of all your fans. That's fine. And then at the end, I will tell you not what the whiskeys are, but where the whiskeys come from. Because really what we're trying to demonstrate here is that regardless of origins, if a whiskey demonstrates that it has merit, that it should be considered no matter where it's from. And the problem with, when we were at the whiskey show, when you walk up to a booth and there's a big brand, you know exactly what you're walking into. That immediately colors your impression of the whiskey. Even when you're at home and you have that bottle in front of you on the table, you're bringing some bias knowing what it is, right? And in this setting, all that's out the window, and it's just you and the whiskeys.
Okay.
I really appreciate you saying you're trying to alleviate the pressure. Jess has already texted us. She was at the Judgement of Westland at the whiskey show in London.
She was.
And got 4 out of 4 on her blind tasting. So
She was pretty well. That's interesting. It's history, maybe.
something
4 out of 4
remember
wrong.
said.
4 out of 4 wrong.
I remember her saying that she got 1 or 2 of them right. Now all of a sudden she got all 4 right. So she may be doing some selective memory there.
Well, you multiply for proof. So she got 2 right, right? So.
I think Sweet Scott, who was also in attendance, was much more modest, perhaps. But
Either way, Jason, the stakes for you are very high if you don't get them all wrong. That's the main takeaway. So
I'm sure I can thoroughly embarrass myself here. I think I have blind tasting blindness, where it's all too easy for all 4 to taste the same for me. Right? I think my color blindness extends to my palate at times like this. Or, just like you did with the counting of elephants, Matt, I think I just panic and my taste buds just switch off.
you are sweating a little more than when we started. I can tell.
It's getting hot in this room. It's getting hot.
So, again, nose through each one, taste through each one, and then come back to each one before giving each a score.
Well, the good news is I have clearly identified one. There's one in this group that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt where it's from.
yeah, big swings. This is it.
Yeah.
And
I know.
No, let's wait till the end.
Okay.
Let's wait till the end.
Yeah.
that's right.
Well,
we don't want to give Jason the right answer.
that's a good point.
I was hopeful that one of these came from Westland. That's the only thing I'm hoping for here.
Jason is much more entertaining when he appears to be lost.
Yeah, I just
So you're
bullshit
telling
my
me-
way through it.
You're telling me
Yeah, that's
one
it.
of these is not from Westland. Is what you're. Now I'm reading between the lines.
Dance, boy, dance. You are psyching yourself out live in front of us. It's fantastic.
This is really, really interesting. There's two.
Which number are you on, Joshua?
Well, so I've tasted through all four.
Okay.
And there's two within the four that if, gun to my head, I would say they're both from Scotland. But if I understood what you were saying before, is there's 4 whiskeys here representing 4 different single malt producing countries. Do I have that correct?
That's correct. It's one of the few things that I will confirm is that no two whiskeys are from the same country.
I can't right now.
But again,
I can't
you two are both getting very waylaid by the task of guessing.
Yeah,
Put it out of your mind.
Right now, I
Zen
can't even
yourself.
think. I can't even think what a country is right now. Like that's how freaked out I am.
Well, Jason, you're in America. There's only one country here that really matters.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. That helps. That helps a lot.
Yep.
Okay, I've got a grounding. There's only one country. Okay, there's only one country.
So as we proceed, and as Jason tries desperately to calm himself down, I'd ask of you this: most people use that tasting mat and are jotting down tasting notes for each of the whiskeys. I'm actually quite interested, and I know Dave and Sam and the team here would be interested in hearing what you guys think of each whiskey. But really, what I'm most interested in is once I reveal to you what countries these whiskeys are from, what are your impressions more broadly of the exercise, right? Are you surprised? Are you shamed, Jason, by not being able to guess them? Did you like something, especially from a country you didn't expect to? Are you happy that you got something right? All of those things are really what I'm after here.
Yeah, to be honest with you, there's nothing that immediately jumps out at me as Scottish. I feel like I've got more of a leaning towards what might be Indian, what might be American. Australia, I don't know that well. And so the Australia one, kind of the door remains open on that one. But if there's a Scotch, well, given that there is a Scotch in here, it is a delicate, fruity, floral Scotch that's hiding among these 4. Would be something I would say out loud.
I will say this: all 4 of them are really tasty. I wouldn't give any of them a 1 or 2 star. I think you've got 3 as a baseline and then up.
Yeah.
That's great to hear.
Yep.
Joshua, which one do you think is the American? Because for me, if
there's no thinking. I know exactly which one is the American. And so the fact that you don't know which one is the American is, I think it's hurting Steve's feelings, really. Mine for sure. Yeah.
So let me put some leaves on the branches.
Yep.
So for us, we've waxed lyrical multiple times about Westland having this chocolatey quality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as I go through the 4 samples, there's one that clearly has a chocolatey quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious which number that is for you, because I know which number it is for me.
Are we allowed to say
Why don't we do this?
Yeah.
Why don't we do this, gentlemen?
Yeah.
Put your hand up like that and put the number behind your hand.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hold it up. Hold it up.
All right.
Jason, hold it up so we can all see it.
Can you see my hand?
Don't curl it behind your neck. Okay? And then reveal it on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. It appears Jason's claw is very hard to see.
Yeah, because it's so you just see through it.
But it appears to me that you're both holding up the number 3.
There we go.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, I guess.
And
You'll either be celebrated or derided.
Oh, so you're not even going to let us
in moments.
You're not even going to let us off the hook right now.
No.
I'm going to
use much too fun for me.
Okay.
I'm going to use every shred of confidence that a middle-aged white man has,
which is
and say that which is a lot. That there are 2 distilleries I've always said I can pick them out of a lineup, blind tasting, and those have always traditionally been Springbank and Imperial, and I think I've added a third. I think I can call out Westland in a lineup. I'm so confident about number 3, and just a tiniest shred of fear with this look of concern and these sort of, furrowed eyebrows that you're throwing me across the Zooms.
I think it's interesting that you're going out on a limb in 2 ways.
All right.
One, you're presuming to know that number 3 is from the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And then further, you're presuming to know that whiskey from the United States is a Westland whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be willing to bet a $2 bill on that. I'd put $2 on that.
Oh, and those are rare.
They are
So-
rare. I have one in my wallet.
So in fleshing this out, Joshua, if we're both confident that we know the US, and would even go so far as to name the distillery, do you feel confident knowing one of the other 3 is Scottish or Indian or Australian? Do you have a confidence on a number 2? Let me say a second identification.
Thank you, because I could have gone somewhere else.
Yeah,
I could have
don't
gone
want to confuse
Remember,
anybody.
I said this is duty, not duty.
Right?
So, yes.
So do you have a second
one.
identification here on a
Yeah.
country?
So if I were to hazard a guess, I would say that either 1 or 4 is a Scotland whiskey, a Scottish whiskey.
So I've been leaning towards 1 being a Scottish whiskey. And that's what I meant earlier when I talked about the delicate floral.
Toward which one?
Fruity. Number 1, I've got a confidence on that.
When I tasted number 2, I was presented with what I think is a hint of peat, but it was a vegetal style or some sort of vegetality. Is that a word? Vegality?
Careful. Walk away from the cliff edge.
But it reminded me a little bit of the kind of vegetal smoke or vegetal earthiness that you'd get from like a Crofton Gaya or something from the Loch Lomond distillery, right? That just sort of delicate funk.
On which number?
2, Douai.
Interesting. Okay, so for me, the second...
But I don't think it is.
I've got a warm oatmeal happening on 2 around some nice fruit salad. Number 2, I think, is India. I tend to get that combination of oatmeal and fruit salad from certain Indian whiskies.
I'd buy that. And really the only reason why I thought it could potentially be a Scottish whiskey is just because of that sort of delicate vegetal bit. But hearing your explanation, I'm with you. So now it's between 1 and 4, right?
Well, and I've committed to 1 being Scotland. I've played my hand.
To 1.
Yep, I've played by hand, which for me, and that's what I was alluding to earlier, not knowing, Australian category overly well, right? Mm-hmm. I've got a process of elimination has brought me to 4 being Australian, but
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's Scottish. I don't. I think you're right on number 1. Right, number 1 has that fresh pear drop coming through, which you find so often on the Scottish new makes. So
yep. I'm just left. Process of elimination gives me Australia for number 4. Oh boy, I've committed.
So if I may,
I've committed.
mid-tasting to perhaps give you guys some marks
Oh boy.
Okay.
on your performance.
Oh boy.
Unfortunately,
Oh, no.
as far as pupils are concerned, you're not at the head of the class, not because of your guesses, but because you're focused on guessing. Joshua,
yeah.
Joshua, I'll put you just a neck ahead of Jason because you did say that you liked all of the whiskeys and that your baseline was 3 stars. but you've both since veered away from scoring them individually on their own merits and
Okay.
dived headfirst into the abyss of guessing
So this is
what these whiskeys are.
This is a valid comment. I will certainly allow you validity on this comment. However, I'm not going to mark down or up because of its region. And I understand with the Judgement of Westland and this blind tasting and this anonymity, I understand it's to get people to reverse, right? Tell me if you like it first, then tell me where it's from. I don't give a flying fuck where it's from, right? But there is that competitive streak in me in this blind tasting where I want to see if I can parse it out. But yeah, I thought they were all great. I'm probably
I'm getting this visions of Looney Tunes where you've got the one character on one shoulder and the other character on the other shoulder, Jason, and they're kind of arguing with each other. It doesn't matter where they're from. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I see the internal conflict.
Meanwhile, I'm just brushing the hair, saying monsters are such interesting people. All right.
I'm ready to go with scores. Like what do you want
Okay,
next? I will leave you to be in charge, Steve.
Okay, well,
What do you want next?
the first thing I need to do is get you, Jason, the QR code.
He can just scan it from my Zoom, can't he?
Yeah, there you go. Scan that there with your phone, Jason.
Okay.
And I want you to both get into that webpage and start scoring each of the 4 whiskeys. Again, 1 star through 5 stars. Nice to hear that Joshua is eliminating 1 and 2 stars for all, which is great.
Again, we're not talking about eliminations. This is duty. D-U-T-Y.
Yes,
Yeah.
D-U-T-Y.
Just for the record, I'm also not going lower than 3. I thought we were gonna. Are we gonna announce our scores?
You know, your scores are yours
All right.
to broadcast or to keep
Okay.
to yourself. It's really up to you.
All right. Okay.
For
If
the
you
sake
want
of
the world, if you want the world to know,
for the
then
sake of
by
our
all means.
listeners and ourselves, so 3 is. So can you just remind us what the stars are, at least from 3 up?
Yeah, 3 would be I like that whiskey. I'd buy a bottle.
4 is I
4
want Joshua
stars
to buy
is
2.
I really like it. I hope Joshua buys me 2 bottles and sends it to me with a nice note. And 5 would be this is an exceptional whiskey of complexity, balance, character. It speaks to me. It tells me a story.
I've rounded one of my scores from 4.5 to 5, since there is no half.
Yes, please do. There were several that in some of the in-person tastings that were doing it manually on the tasting mat that insisted on filling in only half a star.
People gonna people.
People gonna people.
Okay, my voice has been heard, I'm being told.
Okay,
Wow.
Jason
Well, I'm,
has submitted his scores. Joshua,
I'm just.
being a little more pensive and studious about it.
Well, I'm just making sure, right? So I'm going through each one one last time before I give it the score.
Yeah, I thought these were 4 lovely selections. I think the 4 of them reside lovely together. I think Dave and Sam did very well with curating the selection. If I'm right on the Scottish, I would have wanted more from it.
Yeah. That's what you're saying.
That's interesting.
That's nice.
Oh, I get. Earlier you were talking about number 2 gave you just a little bit of the barnyard or a little bit of the peat going on. And as I just stuck my nose back in it, I just got a distant hint of barnyard.
Yep. Yeah. It's just that slight funk, that veggie, that one.
Walk away
Okay.
from the cliff, not even come back
Walk
from
away.
the edge. Just leave the cliff now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my voice has been heard.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, gentlemen, for
Thank you, Steve.
playing along.
And Matt.
I hope this has been fun. But the real fun actually comes with the big reveal, does it not?
Yeah, it'll only be fun if I'm right. If I'm wrong, this will have been a terrible experience, and I'll feel
Okay, hold on. I
horrible
just want to
about
make sure I have
Okay.
this in my head. Got it in my head.
Okay. I can tell you, gentlemen, that neither of you are completely right.
Alas.
Okay.
So I suppose Jess can claim that she has you. But again, her recollection of the day might be a little different than mine. But I'm not at all surprised that you gentlemen were close, even though I told you not to guess, and you proceeded to spend the last 30 minutes obsessively guessing
Obsessively
on each whiskey.
is the perfect choice of words.
Yes. Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Let me make sure I have the correct.
I just hope I've got the American
Set,
right.
which I
that's,
do.
That's all I hope. So long as I've got the American right, I can sleep tonight.
Whiskey number 1
Uh-huh.
is from
Hopefully Scotland.
Australia.
Okay, there you go. Good job. Good start.
Wow. Okay.
Whiskey number 1 is from Australia. Whiskey number 2, Jason, is from India.
Okay.
Well done, you.
My
Well done.
oatmeal and
Well
my
done.
my fruit salad held up. Okay.
You can tell your wife tonight that you're worthwhile. Whiskey number 3
Please
Gentlemen.
say America, please.
is from the United States of America.
Oh, thank God.
Okay.
Thank
At least
God.
the two that we were most convinced about were the two we got right. And you said earlier 1 and 4 were interchangeable for you from Scotland.
So four, I never announced what I thought 4 was. Should I announce it before you reveal it?
Sure.
Because I was on the fence with this one because I was convinced that 1 was Scottish, and so my mind went on 4 to an Irish single malt. But taking a final sip, and you know what? I'll stick with it. I'll say Irish single malt and see how wrong I am.
Whiskey number 4
Yep.
is from Scotland.
I meant Scotland.
Yeah. Yeah, there's only Scotland, India, US, and Australia on the website.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
it
I
seems
haven't
that
read the
Jason
website.
cheated a bit, looked the website up, and knew the 4 he was choosing from.
Oh, see, I was wondering why you were like
Oh,
the
so-
Indian whiskey made sense to me.
Oh, interesting. So,
But
so
yeah.
you sent us the link, and I clicked on the link weeks ago.
Oh, I did too. I just
John-
forgot everything I read.
Okay. Okay, I did the
As he
homework
does,
that
as he
was
does.
given to me. Okay. And then I didn't follow the prompt, so I'm not the perfect student. I know
So,
that.
Joshua came to the tasting completely blind.
Okay, and that's how you've been doing them?
Jason, yeah, I suppose people could look at the website and come a little more informed.
Gotcha,
But most
gotcha.
people come completely blind.
Gotcha.
We've got Japan as a popular guess for some of these drams.
That makes sense.
So, yeah, that was fun, wasn't it, guys?
That really was. I love the fact, and I know you guys have said it previously in other podcasts, but in other episodes of the podcast, but I love the fact that you do this as a team on a weekly basis. I think that's incredibly smart and really does get out of biases and reshape context and all of that. So, yeah, kudos to you. That was fun.
Indeed, that was
And I know you two aren't necessarily the ones that need to be convinced, but your impressions on the idea that single malts made from around the world should be equally considered based on their own merits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jason's point was a good one as you were chiding him, and rightfully so, Steve.
Yeah.
But his point was a good one. I think that at least he and I are at a point now that we wish other people were at, where the understanding is single malt is made around the world, and around the world it's made in a wonderful way and should be on an even playing field. Yes, Scotland and Ireland have been doing it longer than everybody else, but Japan has showed that it can make fantastic single malt. Israel has shown that. India has shown that. And it's just a matter of educating the public. And I think this is a great way, grassroots way, of getting people to understand that, to change their preconceived notions of 25-year-old Scotch is the best. Yamazaki is the best, etc. You know.
Yeah. I'll throw in for all of our Australian listeners that the sample that I thought was Scottish got my lowest score, which was 3 stars. Would buy a bottle. Got my lowest score. To find out that was Australian actually surprises me, because it really had the qualities of younger refill bourbon Scotch that I'm familiar with, and being a proud Scotsman through and through, I was okay giving the lowest score on the sheet to a Scottish whiskey. If I'd known it was Australian, I may have gone a little higher on it, right? Give Australia the little single malt bump on that
You're
one.
demonstrating the bias.
Exactly.
Here,
Absolutely.
you?
Yeah. Absolutely.
You were so focused on guessing that guessing influenced your scoring.
Yep. Absolutely. Steve, I've failed you this day.
This is quite the psychological experiment.
It is. It's also why I hate blind tasting, right?
Inside the mind of Jason Johnstone Yellen. A scary place to be sometimes, but very informative.
It's a very scary place as I sit here with excrement all over my face. Which was before we even popped the first cap.
Yes,
but anyway.
Very much out of context for
It's
everyone
just supposed
but
to
the three
be.
of us.
It's supposed to be eggs on your face, not excrement. Right, you got it wrong.
You can tell I'm still a foreigner in a foreign land. Before we get out of here, Steve, I just want to say congratulations to Westland on the partnership with the Seattle Kraken. Seeing this
yes.
NHL experience and the bottle that's at the distillery, very, very cool. And even having the anchor bars dotted around Seattle is very cool. And so, congratulations on that partnership. And I wish you the best of luck going forward on that.
Last night was the first game. Very exciting. We came up just short, but I mean, hockey fever is high here in Seattle. No pun intended. Yeah, it's really cool. We have our own Westland Whiskey bar in the new Climate Pledge Arena, which is a new $1 billion arena, which is super, super exciting, and everybody is absolutely gaga over the commemorative bottling that we've done, and
it's a beautiful label. It's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a fun thing to be a part of.
I didn't follow the arrival of the team that closely, to be perfectly honest. Was it a movement or was it an expansion?
Expansion. Okay. We are the 32nd team.
There you go.
Yeah.
So are we going to see a story like the Las Vegas Knights? Are you going to rise to playoff prominence in no time at all?
Well, I would say Vegas, who will quickly become, if they haven't already, our arch enemies. We fell just short by a goal last night, but they proved that an expansion team can go to the Stanley Cup in their first year.
Yeah,
we held toe-to-toe with them last night. They're one of the best teams in the league, so I'd say that's promising.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm excited to follow along and see how things shape up. But having Westland behind them, I think is going to be fantastic. Fans of Westland, I think we'll support them well.
I think with the leadership of Westland, they can't but help go far, right?
Yeah. Brilliant. Indeed. Joshua's excited about all the sports talk.
Yeah, look at him.
He's like, yes.
He's about to keel over in his chair.
Here for the hockey talk.
I am slightly, just real borderline excited, only because I'm a fan of the underdog anything, and the fact that hockey is not followed as broadly as baseball and football are, or that soccer is not followed as much as baseball and football are. I kind of want that to get a bit more notice, and so I want to talk about it a bit more, and so I do have a little bit of excitement for it, and more than anything, I'm just excited to see Westland's name on more things, so that's what excites me.
Oh, fair enough.
Before we get out of here, Joshua, I gave some broad strokes on the blind tasting experience. Do you have a few thoughts before we wrap it up?
Well, I think you don't like blind tastings.
Only because I'm terrible at it. If I was great at it, I would want to do it all the time.
Because he's clearly terrified of doing them.
But I may be worse than you are at it. But I think the difference is I don't mind being wrong. Where I think you have a problem with being wrong. I like being challenged. I like, I like going in there with blinders on and even though Steve had said, try not to guess, try to, just go in there with an open mind. It's just so obvious because we have tasted a lot of things that you want to go in there and you want to analyze. And it shows you that even people who have been tasting thousands of whiskeys need that some basic understanding of what's in the glass before they can even begin to guess, for the most part, right? And so...
Yeah, it's that context, that need for context.
Right, and it's almost like Green Lantern in reverse, right? One of the things that I loved about Green Lantern as a comic book character is that anyone could be a superhero so long as they prove to that ring that they have the courage to be that superhero. And so when we as people who have been drinking, for so long and had so many different whiskeys, everybody's on that level playing field, and I really like that. I just really like being there where anyone can guess. And we've got some good friends, like our friend Ben Weldy.
Yep.
I've not known anyone who can blind guess better than him. I don't know how he does it. He is more deserving of that Green Lantern whiskey ring than anyone else I know.
Beautiful.
I find it very interesting how Joshua needed to counterbalance the sports talk with superhero talk, right?
And
just to bring his life back into equilibrium a little bit.
And he did it so well. So well.
Yeah.
Let's get out of here on Joshua doing that so well. Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for sharing
Thanks,
this
guys.
with us.
That was fun.
Thanks for Matt.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
to Matt, who was able to join us for some period of time.
Indeed.
And then had to go on to important things. It's been a ton of fun. Cheers, Matt. Cheers.
Take care, guys.
Sincere thanks to Steve for the time that he spent with us, to Matt for taking time to come join us when he was able, to Westland for bringing us into this judgment. I really meant what was said in there, that as this continues and as they build up those numbers of participants, I really want to double back and revisit with Steve, because he's the man charting the numbers behind the scenes, and see what conclusions he's drawing from all of this. And potentially at that later date, we might get to put a few more leaves on the anonymous branches of samples 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, with that said, before we went into that, I said I wanted to pause our conversation and then re-pick it up after the audio had been shared with our listeners. Now we're in that position. So there's two things that I want to return us to.
Okay.
Number one, in our introduction, we talked about there being discernible notes that one can identify and take to a distillery. So that's part number one. Part number two, in the tasting, you and I had a very brief conversation that 1 or 4 could have been Scottish or Australian.
Yes.
And we did go for one over the other, and it turns out we were wrong in the way that we went with one over the other. And I know Steve gave us into trouble for how we were going about the tasting, and I still appreciate that. But I want to return to that part as well, where if you'd simply asked me, do you think you could pick a Scotch and an Australian single malt apart? I think I would have pretty convincingly said yes. And to have not done that in this context, interesting. And so I want to just, when the time comes, I want to double back to that and get your sense of what you were getting with 1 and 4 and what kind of left the conversation open. So now I've shared both tasks with you. Okay. One of the two of us has to remember these two things, because now we've shared it with the listener as well.
Shoot, I just remembered you shared one of the two, not both. One of the two?
Yeah, that's both.
Okay, so one of them was one of them was Australia and Scotch whiskey, right? Why?
That's the second.
Why
Yeah,
you got
that's
us
the
so
second
confused.
point.
And then the first point was
A singular moment, a singular note that you attach to a distillery.
yes. Okay, good. Yep. Okay, good.
So in bringing us back to that first point, you and I knew going in that the Judgement of Westland would probably present a really significant chocolate note
Yeah.
at some point. And as I went through the four whiskies, I got a significant chocolate note. And I was kind of like, yes. But what that's also got me thinking about is you and I both received copies of the new whiskey book, Nick Morgan's whiskey book,
Yeah.
published. I forget who the publisher is, but available through the Whiskey Exchange.
Yes.
And so Kinder Singh writes the introduction to it. And very early on in that book, Nick Morgan says barley has nothing to do with flavour, regardless of what some distillers would have you believe. And that's a strange point to me, because you and I have been around Westland for pretty much a decade, right? We've spent countless hours talking to Matt Hofmann, who is deep in the camp of barley equals flavour. And then you and I knew that their use of chocolate malt delivers a chocolatey quality in their whiskey.
Yeah. So I have things to say about this. So firstly, I will say when it comes to Westland, don't forget, they don't always use their 5 malt mash bill. Quite often, they're producing just the Washington Pale Malt. And I would say with both distillates, even though I can identify the chocolate malt one more than I can the Washington Pale Malt, that their yeast note comes through for me, that sort of foam bananas kind of note that I get coming through with Westland. So with Westland, with their 5 malt blend, I think that their spirit, their distillate, their whiskeys are unmistakable for me. However, the pale malt might be different. But if I look for those foam banana notes or that foam banana note, then maybe I'll find it there. Anyway, my issue with Dr. Nick Morgan's comment, and I do have to say, I absolutely adore Dr. Nick. He's a lovely guy. He's opinionated. He has opinions, but I think he's earned his opinions. However, his statement that barley does not offer up flavor, I think it was too broad a statement. I think we need to recognize that distilleries like Westland, like Westward, like Copperworks, and a few others are somewhat anomalous when it comes to the larger single malt whiskey producing countries/distilleries around the world, because what they're doing to the barley to affect flavor is different than what Dr. Nick is talking about. What Dr. Nick is saying is barley is barley is barley. You're going to get some yield out of it. It may be greater, it may be lesser. If there are flavor differences, it's going to be nominal and will likely be matured out. However, what he's not taking into consideration is different roasting levels. And that's where Westland comes into play. So I think if he had included the idea of various roasting levels, or included the idea, let me say this again. Let me say it better. I think if he came at it from a brewer's perspective, he would have a very different statement. And that's the thing. Westland, Westward, Copperworks, all of these, they're coming at producing whiskey from a brewer's perspective first. And he's making that statement from a whiskey producer's perspective first. And so I just don't think the two jibe perfectly.
But it's interesting, though. I really like the points that you raise there, but it also seems to dismiss what we've heard from Dr. Bill Lumsden, right? Where Bill has explored different barleys And then they've also got Signet with the chocolate malt going on. But even just different barleys have been part of the experience. Different yeasts, and the wild yeast that he talked about in one of our episodes. So even for Scotch whiskey, there are still those who will say barley does make a difference.
But if you recall, one of the reasons, and I think that was I forget which Glenmorangie it was. A Two Sail. I think it was the Two Sail. No, that was the wild yeast one. I forget which Glenmorangie it was. But if you recall, he'd said we only let that get to be 9 years of age because at that point I could see all of the differences were starting to be matured out. Mm. And so, right, and that's first and second fill bourbon. Especially with second fill, it's really, the wood isn't doing a lot. It's being gentle on that gentle spirit. And if you have a gentle wood that after only 9 years starts aging out that nuance, then how significant is it? And so I guess the question is, should the statement better be said that different barley varieties won't present significant flavor changes? In Nick Morgan's defense, I do think that there's a potential for barley variety to affect flavor. I don't necessarily believe in barley terroir affecting flavor. Right? When we were at Westland, and Matt and Steve and Shane and all them were showing us the new make from different barley varieties, Obsidian, Talisman, a few others, and you could taste the difference. Mm-hmm. That was surprising to me. When I tasted the Marc Renier, the Waterford new make, and the different new makes there, and you can taste the difference. He not only changed up the barley style, but the barley farm. And I think if you took the farm out of the equation, that the barley variety would still change the flavor. And tasting those, you could see the difference. You could see that barley is affecting flavor. But then we take the example of Bill Lumsden with his whiskeys, and he's using different barleys and different yeasts, and he says, you know what? I can't mature this for too long because all of the differences age out. And so, I think what we're seeing here is that barley type will affect flavor from a nuanced standpoint, not necessarily nothing staggering. And I would potentially agree with Dr. Nick. I don't believe in terroir when it comes to barley, but I do believe in barley variety potentially affecting flavor up into a point.
Yeah, now you've got me intrigued about seeing the ages at which this will run through. And I'm thinking about, Copperworks using different barley, and I'm thinking about Westland using different barley. And obviously we get to taste those young. There's also experiments going on in Scotland with different barley where we've tasted those as new make spirit. You just mentioned Waterford a second ago. I'm very intrigued now to see how long do those differences stay in there? At what point does the wood topple those barley nuances that you're identifying? I like it. Let's put a bow on that first point that we were making there. Move into the second point, which is we were moving between 1 and 4 in our particular tasting, where we were pretty confident that 3 was at least American single malt, if not Westland. And number 2 was Indian, and I talked about that kind of oatmeal and that kind of fruit cocktail combination that I get in Indian single malts. What were you getting between 1 and 4? And did you ever think you'd be vacillating between, is this a Scottish single malt or an Australian single malt?
Well, I found it really surprising that you were surprised of the similarities, because I think both of us approached 1 and 4 from the perspective of two people who have had little to almost no experience with Australian single malts. We've had our Star Wars, right? We've had our Fanny Bays that Hawley Side One has introduced to us. We've had Backwoods, but what we've had from Backwoods are rye, not single malt. And
Sullivan's Cove back in the day.
It's Sullivan's Cove, but back in the day. And I guess what I would say is I'm surprised that there aren't as big, or at least in this case, there wasn't that big a difference between the Australian single malt coming off as potentially a Scottish single malt and the Scottish single malt, of course, being a Scottish single malt. Like you when you were setting things up, you seemed like surprised, like how could we ever confuse these two? And I think it's quite easy. We just don't have the experience to not confuse them.
Yeah, I guess partly for me, it is on the back of maturation, and it is thinking about a climate that has a spring, a summer, an autumn that looks more like Kentucky. And has extreme temperatures. You know, like we've talked to Lee about bungs getting popped right across his warehouse space, right? And so I was expecting there to be more wood presence, right? And I don't mean this in the pejorative, but a more aggressive oakiness than we could ever hope to produce in Scotland, right? Our climate never allows us to get aggressive oak on there. So it's why virgin oak, you know, those experiments that we tasted back in the day from someone like Glen Murray, why virgin oak can still work in Scotland.
Yeah. You know,
take that to a headier climate, a warmer climate, and you're going to be pulling splinters out of your tongue. And so I was just expecting a more woody profile from something out of Australia. But I do want to get back to what you said a moment ago, which is we really don't know anything about the flavours, the textures of Australian single malt. So I really was just working on an assumption. And I think that was the point of my surprise was, wow, I came in here with an assumption that is just being laid bare right now.
Yeah.
Didn't see that coming. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come in with that assumption. So that was the surprise for me.
Yeah. You know, I will say our experience with Starward tended to take us outside of the style that we were tasting during our time with Steve, because Starward is those big, huge wine casks, right? Big flavors that take you outside, you know, what you would potentially confuse as a Scotch whiskey, take you outside that flavor category. And then on top of that, you know, Lark with their unusual peat sometimes, you know, that would take us outside. Like this one, if we ever hear what the distillery is, it will be really interesting to follow them and see what they're doing and see if it differs. Are they looking to go outside of the style of Scotch whiskey, or are they looking to stay within that particular profile because, well, Scotch whiskey is the origin, right? That's who you want to emulate if you want a certain segment of drinkers. So it'll be interesting to find that out.
I think that's the word for me coming out of the experience is interesting. And as alluded to in our chat with Steve, I'm interested and I'm intrigued to see what does it mean to be Australian single malt. I think you just hit it out of the park there. What wood is being used in Australia, and what's that doing to the Australian spirit? Even is it possible to talk about an Australian spirit any more than it's possible to talk about a Scottish spirit or an American spirit?
And the final thing that I'll say, and then I think we should wrap this up and maybe go to the news, is in speaking with Lee at Backwoods and talking about those shifts in season where you have an aggressive summer and then an incredibly gentle winter, I think Australian distilleries have the luxury of having very seasonal whiskeys. Having, what's your summer release? Sure going to taste different than your winter release, depending on what's going on with the wood. And so that would be interesting to know as well, if that's a thing. If Australians even talk about that aspect of.
Yeah, but I think it equips us with questions to ask as we're unearthing, as we're discovering, right? And I think that's my takeaway from this experience is world single malt, in which I include Scotch, not separate Scotch, right? World single malt production and maturation and bottling is really interesting and well worth following and well worth comparing and contrasting.
And at the end of the day, everything we've said up until now, put to the side, it's clear that all of these countries are making quality single malts, right? And all it's doing is providing the consumer with more flavors, different flavors. And I hope that Westland is successful with this, that they're able to get the word out. I hope, too, that if American single malt officially becomes a category, they can help bring that story, this particular story forward to say, hey, look, yes, the Scots have been doing it. Yes, Japan has been doing it. We could do it too. And guess what? So can those in India. So can those in Israel. So can those in Taiwan, and et cetera, et cetera. So, but as with anything, it's education, 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 and education.
Not forgetting
education.
Well done.
Yeah.
I could keep going. I'm purposely zippering my mouth because I could keep talking on this. So
yeah, let's
press on.
Okay.
On to the news. Wake up the paper boy.
Wake up, you wee fuck. Wake up.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Life story of Playboy Penny. Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it. Me and that Playboy and
Oh, Jason, we have some serious news to bring to you. And, we made a promise to our listeners that we would bring on the wonderful Elijah Ammon to talk about retail release number 8, which should be hitting U.S. shores before October is out. Let's cross fingers. Let's cross toes. Who knows? It could be October 2023, but let's hope that's not the case. But I'm sad /sorry/ other words to report that we don't have Elijah today. That it's just you and me.
We do not, but he sent word that he has a wonderful Instagram series called Banter About the Barrel. And you've been on and I've been on, and you and I discussed a few bottlings from US retail release number 7. Anthony Levinson from Roma was on talking about the Ardmore selection for the Roma store in New York City. And Christopher Grombeck of the Barrel Thief in Seattle has been on to talk about the cask that he selected for Barrel Thief. You and I will be on there with Elijah discussing US retail release number 8. And that's hosted by Single Cask Nation.
Yes.
On Instagram.
Live.
With Elijah at the helm for the US retail releases. And soon we will have Jess Lomas at the helm for the rest of the world releases. And you and I and Elijah will take turns jumping on there to sit and chat with Jess as well. And I like this, in creating this series, Elijah is determined to keep it to the length, individual episodes, to the length of a tight extra. So 30 to 35 minutes.
Well, I took him to 42 minutes.
Yes, you did. I took him to 37, so. And bet him that mine would be shorter than yours, and I was right.
Yeah, yours is shorter than mine. That is true. So, with that said,
Yes.
retail release number 8 has some serious treats in there. And
Yes, it does.
I wanted to start going over that. And we actually have, what is it, 7? Yeah, we've got 7 different, well, we've got 6 whiskeys, and then we have a rum to talk about.
There we go.
Are you ready?
I more or less am.
So the first one I want to talk about, even though it says Single Cask Nation on it, it's a bottling that doesn't contain just the one cask. It's a marriage of 6 casks. And this was our second collaboration with the Whiskey of Life film. And so we're just calling this one lovingly Wolf Island. It's a non-age stated whiskey. We will say it's all ex-bourbon cask matured. We can't talk about what distillery it came from.
We cannot.
We cannot. We cannot and we will not. That one has 1,600 bottles in the lot. And bottled at 48.8% alcohol, all first fill bourbon, really bright, crisp, citrusy front porch type whiskey, if you know what I mean. Some of the listeners may have actually seen a picture of the bottle on the Single Cask Nation Instagram or in a Single Cask Nation Instagram story. So if you're not already following Single Cask Nation on Instagram, please do. We are at Single Cask Nation. So that's whiskey number 1.
Yeah, it's a beautiful bottling with a really fun label and gave us another opportunity to collaborate with the Water of Life film. You know, Greg, Trevor, Alphonse, the rest of the team, just tons of fun working with them, collaborating with them. And I'm excited to get this really good, accessible retail bottling onto shelves, celebrate that collaboration.
Yeah, indeed. The next one is actually the second Daluane that we've bottled for retail. The first one, it was listed as undisclosed, and that's simply because we weren't reading the contract properly. We could have said this was distilled at the Daluane Distillery, but we didn't. We called it undisclosed at the time. That previous one was a 28-year-old. This one is a glorious 9-year-old from a first fill bourbon hogshead. And it's just, what would you say jumped out about this one for you?
Spicy.
Spicy.
It's got a really wonderful spicy presence to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes ex-sherry maturation will deliver some spiciness to my palate. Knowing that this is first fill bourbon maturation, but then with the spiciness from the spirit, it's really cool. And I think an unbelievable little drinker.
Oh, yeah.
Hashtag, please drink responsibly.
And that one's 55.6% alcohol. The next one, this one has a really cool story to it because there's some cask finishing provenance going on here. So the next one's a 15-year-old Inchfad. Inchfad is a peated spirit from the Loch Lomond Distillery. And the whiskey spent 15 years of its life in a bourbon hoggy and then was transferred into, you're going to love this, it was transferred into the Grand Cru Bordeaux Barrique that previously held our 8-year-old Penderyn. And we only put it in that cask just for a few months, I think around 8 months or so, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. And what's beautiful about it is that Inchfad gives you that sort of warm biscuits burnt around the edge kind of smoke going on, but then you have that delicate fruity quality coming from the Penderyn, coming from that Grand Cru Barrique. So you have a patisserie, you've got baking spices, you've got smoke, you've got that sort of thing going on, balanced out by sweet berry fruity quality.
Well, and not to make too much about the connection, but this is the first time we've ever taken a cask from an online Single Cask Nation release and used it in any way, shape or form with a US retail release. And it was a nice kind of a nice little attempt there to bring those two families together.
Yeah, bridge the gap a little bit.
Right. And as we say all the time, it's fun to have ideas. It's fun to play around with experiments. If the flavors didn't work and it wasn't a good whiskey, it would be a failure, regardless of how we brought families together. But the fact that it tastes absolutely delicious, and we have the added bonus of bringing the online and the retail together here, I really like that aspect of it.
And I want to be honest here. You know, we bought this Inchfad because it was a good enough whiskey. It was a good whiskey. But I don't think it was great. And, you know, I forget who told me this before. Maybe it was David Stirk. But he said, no one finishes a perfect whiskey. Right? And so it was obvious that it needed a little something, kind of similar to our 28-year-old Cambus that we put in the Muscatel Barrique for about 5-6 months. It was a good little drinker that needed a little something. This Inchfad was a good little drinker, but it needed a little something.
And I'm remembering the Tamdhu that was finished in an American rye quarter cask.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Again, good little whiskey, little oomph, little extra dimension.
A little pick-me-up at the end of the day. The next one, and this one's kind of interesting. In retail release number 7, we released a Linkwood from a refill sherry butt. And this time around, we're doing another Linkwood, another 12-year-old. But this time around, it's finished in a Ruby Port Barrique. And that was finished for about a year. And where the 12-year-old Linkwood and sherry, that was full-term sherry, it was refill. So you got to experience the spirit more than you did the cask, which we loved. In this case, I think the port is making itself known, but in a really nice, really pretty way.
Well, and I think 2 points that I've raised plenty of times on the podcast is, number one, I really like Linkwood. I really like whiskey from the Linkwood distillery. I don't tend to like port maturation or port finishing. And this Linkwood has me really excited. It delivers a red berry fruitiness through the port that is really appealing, really attractive, and I think integrates with the Linkwood spirit.
Great.
And one of the things that I always say is I tend to find port maturation or port finishing is a bit like oil and water, where the Scotch separates from the port influence. Yeah. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm getting port, yeah, I'm getting Scotch, but I'm not really getting them together. Integrated. They're not really talking to each other. This one, I thought the qualities the port brought to the experience worked beautifully with the whiskey at the heart of the experience. I think that's going to be a great 12-year-old to put out there for people.
Yeah, agreed. And I agree. The integration was great. It was like they joined Schwartz's.
That's exactly it. It was Schwartz's that I was thinking in my head.
I see your Schwartz's is big. Oh no, we've already established that yours is shorter than mine. So then we have another Diageo distillery. This time a Ben Rinnes. I can't begin to explain how excited I am for Ben Rinnes. Not just for me. And even though this is coming to the U.S., so he won't be able to get a bottle, for our good friend Graham Usher, who's a massive Ben Rinnes fan. And this one's a 10-year-old from a second fill bourbon barrel. So you've got, Ben Rinnes is a naturally fruity whiskey, and that barrel sort of steps back a little bit and really lets that fruit shine in a
100%.
Gorgeous way. Yeah.
100%. Yep. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Then we have a grain. This time, this is our second Girvan. We released a 10-year-old Girvan back in 2017. And what was interesting is around that time, maybe a little before that, we had purchased a Girvan cask that was a really good price, right? The spirit was there, but the wood was doing nothing. And so we took that Girvan and put it into a first fill bourbon barrel for close to 4 years. So it went from from one bourbon barrel to another bourbon barrel, but it went from refill to first fill because it needed that. It really needed that work. So after 4 years and then tasting it year over year over year, it finally got to the point where it came into its own in a special way, I think. The final bottling for retail release number 8 is our, well, is it a pre? Is it a pris? We don't know how to pronounce it. It's a rum from, I almost said it's a rum from Brasilia.
You should. I think they'd love that.
Brasilia. Hell, really quickly, did I ever tell you my, this was a joke that I heard back when W was president. I'm not being political here. I'm just saying this is the time when that joke came around. And it goes, his chief of staff goes into the Oval Office and he says, Mr. President, I've got some very horrible news to share with you. He said there was a small plane crash and 5 Brazilians actually died while trying to land, such and such an airport. And the president put his head in his hands and just started openly weeping, just uncontrollably openly weeping. To the point where the chief of staff said, sir, this is troubling. I understand that. I just didn't expect, how much emotion would come from you. He said, it's terrible. I mean, but I just want to be certain. How many is a Brazilian? 1 million, 2 billion, 3 trillion.
Oh my God.
It could have been any president, right? And someone who actually knows how to tell a joke could have made you laugh without explaining the joke to you. But I'm not that person. Anyway. The last bottling is our Epris. It's a Brazilian rum, 10 years old. And some people, those in the rum world, would say, geez, isn't that potentially a cachaça? Because cachaça is a rum-like spirit coming out of Brasilia. And no, this was sold to us as a rum. This is a rum. And what I like about this one is it's like drinking Christmas wreaths and balsam and fir candles. It smells of Christmas time, of, that holiday special time.
Yeah, I remember when we first tasted this one, and it was the first time I'd ever thought about sipping a rum at Christmas. Like, that's not a thing, right? Have it on the beach in a daiquiri or a pina colada.
Yeah.
And so the thought of a nice warm fire, maybe some roasted chestnuts, and a Brazilian rum. That was a new wrinkle, but the flavor profile on this is killer. Gosh, if the theme of today's episode is just taste it and see if you like it, that Brazilian rum fits into that so perfectly.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would suggest is one need not get a Brazilian to buy this Brazilian rum.
Not in the winter, no. Not in the winter.
No, you want to keep it nice and warm. Nice and warm.
Yeah. However, for our friends down there, they're just coming into the warmer months, so
is that how
maybe
you
they do want to get
our
friends down there. I think that's how it works. So yeah, Brazilian rum. Who knew?
Oh, so
what
excited!
A treat.
So excited for this rum. So there you go. That's retail release number 8. Now included in that are some single cask exclusives that we've done for shops and for bars, like you had mentioned, Barrel Thief, and in earlier this year, or was it later last year? I don't know how time works anymore. We've already established that. We did the exclusive for Roma in New York. And so my message to our listeners, if you have a shop or something like that and you're interested in your own single cask exclusive, Elijah would be your guy. You could reach out to us, questions at One Nation Under Whisky, and we'll connect you with Elijah. I'll also say we've worked with certain clubs as well. And we can do club picks, but those don't go on retail shelves. Those will go through our online portal. and we can work with you that way.
Yeah, somewhat interestingly, we have a single cask blended Scotch going to the wine exchange, and Elijah is working on speaking with them for banter about the barrel.
There you go.
So there'll be a chance to talk about that.
Nice.
Cool. How fun. And then what about online? How up to date are we announcing online releases?
Creepers. We're not. Okay, I'm gonna try to do this like pew, 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 but I don't know how pew, 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 that'll work. So let's see. So we got a few things going on. So we have a few things going on. Firstly, there's a charitable bottling that we're doing with Salway Bitterroot Group, and that's Croft and Gaia, 16-year-old. Croft and Gaia, by the way, is another peated spirit from the Loch Lomond Distillery. It's a bit more aggressive than the Inchfad, but, again, it's that, yes.
But at 16 years of age, just as we talked about barley flavors potentially maturing out, that slightly more aggressive peat has really softened at 16 years of age. Yeah. It's a real delicate one. And actually, in our next episode, we'll have a conversation with Alyssa Pearson from the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation.
Yeah, nice. Good. Yep, that's great.
Which will include a tasting.
The next one we have is a 10-year-old Kalila, and the day that will go on sale the day after this episode goes live. And that 10-year-old Kalila is a from a bourbon hogshead second fill. And actually on the same day, I was going to save this one for last, but because it's going on sale at the same time as the Kalila, we have our third in what we call our woodcut series. You may remember we did a 30-year-old Bowmore 2 years ago, a 30-year-old Imperial last year, and then this year is a 28-year-old from a famous Islay distillery. We can't mention what distillery it came from, but we lovingly call this the Laughing Frog.
We do indeed.
And,
reflected on the label.
Reflected on the label. And that whiskey is 28 years old, like I said, but all 28 years in that bourbon cask. So that's really exciting. And that one's 51.3%. So even at close to 30 years of age, it retains some good ABV.
Yep.
There's another rum. This one, I can't wait for this one. And actually, we're going to have the producer on the podcast soon, producer/owner, I think, of the distillery, Stephen Maggery, who owns the Beanley Distillery out of Australia. So this is a 14-year-old rum bottled at 65.1% alcohol. So this is big, hefty, but glorious, right? Beanley's that lovely sort of pineapple upside-down cake, kind of real fruity element going on. Not funky, but fruity and delightful.
Yeah, and really happy that this fits within the spirit of collaboration rubric as well. And so really, really exciting flavors, but then also a really exciting relationship as well. And as we've talked earlier about Australian single malt, here we are looking at Australian rum. How fun is that?
Right. Yeah. Really good point there. There are more to be discussed, but these are the four that are coming here and now. But the things that we are bringing out for Single Cask Nation Online, hopefully all of it before the year is done, some really exciting stuff, including some Japanese whiskey that I am just over the moon about. Not too many details there. If you're on our Facebook, the Single Cask Nation members only Facebook page, there has been discussion around this. And if you're not on that means maybe you're not a Single Cask Nation member. So what you do is you go to singlecasknation.com, you sign up for a membership. We're not a whiskey club. I know as I'm saying these words, it may sound as if we're a whiskey club. Obviously, we're not a whiskey club. We are an independent bottler. But we have a sort of Facebook group membership, and you join that. And when you sign up to the website, that gives you access to our online exclusives, still from an independent bottler, not a club. So just like to clarify those things. What else do we have, Jason, before we make like a fetus and head out?
we should really, if that's us putting the news segment to bed, we should probably break out the message from our friend Ian Bruce that we couldn't access in the last episode because Facebook shit the bed. And that, my friend, is a computing term.
Oh, yeah, STB.
STB.
The message from Ian, the dear Mr. Bruce, it came in later September, and there's a lot here. So he says, it's been a fantastic journey. And by the way, we've been having a bit of a back and forth on Facebook, so you're sort of catching the next message he sent, right? He says, it's been a fantastic journey, and I'm glad I've started from the beginning to get the full flavor. So he's talking about listening to the podcast and catching up to the podcast. And then he says, like any good listener, smart listener, says, have I missed the Worm Tub episode? And then he says, currently on the Spousal Takeover. That was our last year Thanksgiving episode.
Oh, that positions him perfectly in my mind. Okay.
Yeah. And he said, you guys took a brave step there talking to your wives, which he's not wrong. He's not wrong. He says, I've got 2 quick queries. 1, storing my whiskey in an old cask made into a bar, would this affect my juice, those open in any way? Okay, that's question 1. Question 2, thinking about worm tubs versus condenser type pipe work, we read and hear it's the difference between the copper contact, but I was thinking that if the inner dimension of a pipe is larger, then would it be the additional oxygen/air that causes new spirit to get those sulfurous or meaty notes? And we can talk about that a little bit here. I don't want to talk about it too much because we do have this Worm Tub episode in the works. And then finally he says, I also managed to finally buy some samples of SCN juice at the weekend. Drank 2 of the samples, which were fantastic. So thanks also for the great drams. They certainly made me go hydraulic. Then that's in quotes. In other words, the liquid really moved me. Cheers, Ian. I like that. Like when something really gets you, you're like, oh, this is making me go hydraulic. Oh, I like that. So, all right. So question number 1. If you have a cask, and I've seen this before, right? Where people, they take an empty cask and they build it into a whiskey shelf. And will that affect his whiskey?
I didn't think the inside was left untreated. I thought one would have put some kind of polymer or resin over the inside so that every time you reach in, say your knuckles brush the inside of the stave, you're not getting char on your knuckles, right? You're turning it into furniture and cleaning it up a bit.
So are you saying that if the inside weren't finished, if it were still charred oak, and this is what I was sort of thinking this, that there's a potential that oak may want to, have that whiskey evaporate out the bottle a bit quicker than it normally would. I don't think that it would. I think
that's not what I was thinking.
No, okay. So what were you thinking?
I was just thinking it would get your hands dirty if it was untreated.
Yeah, no, he's not asking how it would affect your hands. He's asking how it would affect the whiskey.
I don't think it would do anything.
I don't think it would do anything either.
Except for get your bottles dirty.
They get your bottles dirty. Okay.
But here's the thing. So is it one of those barrels that has a hinge put in it, and then you actually pull open half of the barrel to then reveal the internal shelves? Or is it sitting on its end and they've pulled off the head of it and he's just reaching inside onto maybe some shelving that runs around and he's just putting bottles on that? Like either way, I don't think you're going to have conditions as such that is going to pull liquid from glass through oak. It's not like the reason the oak is doing its job in maturation is because the spirit is in contact with the oak and the pores, and that's when it's a sponge. I don't think just sitting there, the oak staves are going to pull liquid or vapors from a glass bottle through a cork through oak pores.
What if it was a situation where you pull the head, right? If your cask is sitting on one end, and the top end, you take the top off, but what's inside, it's filled with water, and the bottles are just floating in, so you're bobbing for bottles. Do you think that would affect it?
And labels are just peeling off and floating to the top of the water. And when you pull out a bottle, you've really no idea what's in it, but there's something kind of murky, like it's
murky.
added to the whiskey in there.
Yeah. I think that could do something. I like that, bobbing for bottles.
What if he just threw corked, like open but corked bottles just into his swimming pool and just stored them there? Like, what would that do?
I closed my pool, so I can't even test the theory.
You're not going to drop your kids at the pool any second? At no point in the winter are you going to drop your kids at the pool?
No. Well, I've got to get more towels, if you know what I mean. So, speaking of that, question number two. His question here is the difference between worm tubs and condensers, right? Shell and tube condensers. And why is it that worm tubs give you that heavier, more sulfurous, those meaty notes, where a shell and tube condenser typically does not? And I feel as if we've put part of a conversation into a previous episode that talked about this, where the reason why you're getting those sulfury / meaty notes is as the spirit is going through the copper tubes, the problem is you can't clean those worm tubs. You can't clean that tube. And so bacteria is collecting within the copper tube, protecting the spirit that's coming through from touching too much copper. So it's condensing down from a temperature standpoint, but it's not cleaning the spirit further from a spirit to copper contact standpoint. And so a lot of those heavier notes that often come through, that often come out due to extended copper contact through a shell and tube condenser or a brand new worm tub, that kind of goes away after a while. And so now you've developed a distillery characteristic of meaty notes, heavy notes, sulfury notes.
Yeah, I didn't think about there being bacteria in there. It would be interesting to take a look at that because of the strength of alcohol that passes through it. That strength is reducing as it passes through. So it'd be interesting to see if there is a later part of the worm that does have bacterial content, or whether there's enough alcohol. I don't think there would still be enough alcohol, but
Yeah.
absolutely the quantity of copper contact in shell and tube is removing impurities.
Yeah.
And the joy of that worm tub is with reduced copper contact, you're simply not removing impurities, or as many. So you are getting those quote unquote off notes.
They're spot on. Everyone was spot on.
Right, the sulfur, the meat, the ramen, the chicken noodle soup, sometimes the strawberries, right? Yeah. And so, I know you're still working your way through it, Ian, but the Stephanie McLeod episode where we do talk about the worm tubs at Craigellachie in searching for that strawberries and cream note that has been found in certain Craigellachie. It's completely unexpected, but she had a hypothesis for why it was the case.
She did, and I'm thinking about my word bacteria, and I don't think that's likely the best word. I think a better word might be a film, right? A film is built within the copper tubes, and it's similar to, what happened with Klein-Leach maybe 8-10 years ago, where they said, you know what, we need to clean our apparatus, clean the spirit safe out and some other bits and bobs. And when they did that, they found the spirit wasn't waxy anymore. And that all that internal piping, all that pipe work, needed spirit to keep running through it until a film had built again to allow that slight impurity to boost the mouthfeel, the texture of the Clynelish spirit. Yeah, they my understanding is they were really kicked themselves in the butts for cleaning that.
Fits with the mythology of the industry as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure does.
You have to hammer in the same den on the still, blah blah blah. If you've always used wooden washbacks, you got to continue using them. If you make a move over to stainless steel, blah blah blah. So there's so many places, and we will hear in a future episode with Georgie Crawford, formerly of Lagavulin and now with Elixir Distillers, the idea of there being so many different places in the production of spirit where something can change on you. It's, I don't want to say more on that there, but as you start to think about Clynelish, right? Like, could you have replaced that part and not had a change? Could you have replaced that part and not had a change? What if you changed that part over there? Would that have made a change? Like,
right?
You start to go a wee bit doolally when you start to really deconstruct the entire process.
And this brings us full circle back to, does different barley varieties or where they are grown make that big a difference? And that's you bring up a really good point with what Georgie was saying. One thing a bit off, and it changes things potentially in aggressive ways. So there's so many variables, and right, this is the fun thing about it. Hearing these apocryphal stories and about whiskey and production, and we accidentally filled the casks at 73% alcohol rather than 63, and that changed. Hearing all this stuff, that makes it fun for me.
Well, look at the new Ardbeg that's coming, right? Where a part broke down and they couldn't empty the washbacks, and so they actually fermented some Ardbeg wash for 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Just open fermentation. Yeah.
Open fermentation, right? Like, and of course, because marketing is always primo, there's never going to be another Ardbeg like this one. But you can taste this, moment in time when something went off the rails. Like, do I want to buy that? 100% yes. Like, do I want to taste that? 100% yes.
Of course.
Right? And then you put it up with your Ardbeg 10 and you put it next to your Wee Beastie and you put it up against your Nambe. Like, this is the entirety of the whiskey industry and whiskey production. Is you're telling me that something, the Stillman wore his red socks instead of his blue socks on that? Yeah. And that just went into a single cask that you're selling to me? Hell yeah, I'll buy that. Yeah. Did the socks on the day make a difference? Like, you can really get into the minutiae. Like our Amanda Beckwith conversation, right? What if you pull from that cask at 6 a.m. when you first walk in after a cooler night, than pulling from that cask at 6 p.m. after a warmer day with a breeze running through the warehouse? You can go bananas.
I only drink Blue Sock Clynelish that was pulled from cask in February, specifically February 29 at 5:59 p.m.
Well, the good news is blue socks are known to be waxier than red socks. So that makes sense. I can understand why that's part of it.
Sexier.
I'll hear nothing against red socks, my man.
Jason, this has been an absolute treat. Oh, you know what? Before I talk about how much of a treat it is, there are ways in which you can reach out to us if you have a question like Ian Bruce did, or like Ariel Green, who just sent in an email recently. And geez, there was maybe one or two others that we need to get to. They emailed us, right? So we need to get to those emails. If you want to get in touch with us, if you have a question, if you have a query, if you want to talk about whiskeys making you hydraulic, reach out to us, questions at One Nation Under Whisky. You can tweet at us at One Nation Whisky. You can send us an Instagram message at One Nation Under Whisky, or you could do, again, like what Ian Bruce did, go to Facebook.com, go to the search bar, look for One Nation Under Whisky, send us a private message, And whiskey, of course, when it comes to us, is never spelt with the E. So WHISKY. And now I can officially say it has been a blast. Because you know what, Jason? It's been a blast.
I'm sure it has been for you.
All right, it hasn't been a blast for you?
Oh, also for me, but I'm sure it has been for you. Okay, we've spent the whole episode saying I'm shorter than you are, but here we are. No, it's been real. It's been thoroughly good, very enjoyable. I tell you what I enjoyed.
Yeah, go ahead.
All of it equally.
Oh, I like that. That's a diplomat's answer. And as the resident diplomat, I tip my hat to you, sir. Well done. Well done.
Cheers, man.
You know what I have in my head? That song, the I Will Survive song now. Something, 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 I was petrified.
First I was afraid I was petrified.
First I was
thought
afraid
that I could never live without you by my side. But I grew strong, I learned how to get along, and so I'm back from outer space. I walked in
From
to
outer
heal
space?
you with, yeah, it's what I always sing. I don't know if it's the right lyric or not. And then, find you here with that look upon your face.
Yes.
Is the next. Yeah.
Look upon your face.
We have the cake version, and so we sing the cake version a lot.
Ah, okay. All right. You don't do the traditional version.
Can you name her?
Yeah, it's
Gloria
Gloria something or other, right? It's Gloria.
It is.
Gloria Estefan. No, it's not Gloria Estefan. Gloria Steenburgen. No, it's Gloria Gloria. Gloria Gloria.
Now you're stalling.
I don't remember her last name.
Gloria Gaynor.
Gaynor. That's it. Gloria Gaynor.
I figured a musician would never forget that last name.
Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whisky podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always